Now I'm very excited about our next speaker. He's coming in from Houston, Texas, having worked around the world, including Europe, which is the focus of our conference. And I'm talking about Kipp Vann, who is here with us. He's the Chief Digital Officer for Refined Technologies, a company that's truly accelerating excellence and innovation in the energy industry. And he's going to talk to us about field-enabled operators, a real application of digital transformation and enterprise architecture. Kipp has more than 25 years of IT leadership experience, ranging from ERP and SaaS consulting services to serving as CIO for a large healthcare staffing business. He co-founded and led a Salesforce-based consulting firm focused on sales, marketing, and customer platform solutions and helping organizations migrate to the cloud. He is currently the Chief Digital Officer for Refined Technologies, an industrial and consulting services provider to the oil and gas and petrochemical industry. Kipp, thank you so much for being here with us. We all benefit tremendously when we hear directly from leaders who are creating the future today, and you're one of those leaders with Refined Technologies. Thank you so much for leading us through this journey of transformation and enterprise architecture today.
Thank you, Jose. All right, see that okay?
Looking good.
All right, so thank you for this opportunity to share what I'm calling 3 lessons learned on architecting a mobile field application. We're probably more than 3 lessons learned, but at least for the sake of brevity and time today, we'll cover some of the highlights. So to cover up front, and we'll circle back in a little greater detail, these lessons is first the benefits or value of software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. A lot of mouthful there, but more or less web-based applications is the benefits how they focus more of the solution on the business value and not just making IT costs more predictable. We'll also talk about the benefits of leveraging low-code, no-code applications versus kind of focusing on some of the technical maybe limits of using these types of tools. And then lastly, we'll cover the importance of integrating the customer experience and process into your operational solution, because sometimes we think about the internal systems we have to support, and then on a separate context, we are then trying to present some type of portal experience to our customers. So integrating those concepts concurrently into the product development, to the architecture, was another key benefit that we'll discuss and how we accomplished it. So a little bit of context about RTI. RTI has been in business for close to 20 years and has been really successful in the work in which they serve their customer. And a lot of that expertise is in their planning. When you're in a refinery and you're planning for a safe shutdown, there's a 12 to 18 month lead time that goes into that process. And so RTI's success has really been highly skilled resources, very knowledgeable, and then when it comes to execution, they're very meticulous in the process. Now, part of what I mentioned, or what I did not mention, is their use of technology to perform that work. And so when we look back 4 years and we laid out a digital transformation program, we understood there were a lot of technologies that we could have leveraged in order to change the business. But what we were concerned about is also overwhelming the business, because if you imagine having very highly skilled operators, they're very well trained in their work, that they do the way that they do it. And so when we will talk through the stages of how we flowed this program out and how it informed our architecture, a lot of this was to ensure that even though we had a vision for where we could take this product in 4 years, we didn't want to spend 3 years into a lab, only to reveal it and decide how close or how far off were we in our solution. And so I'll talk you through the steps that we made, the decisions we made at each of these steps along the way, and why we chose to break the program down at the various stages in order to realize value, because from an architectural standpoint, it definitely changed what we ultimately thought we were going to be building, because we used that feedback loop, that iterative model to make sure that what we were building was never too far off from what the business was expecting. So what we outlined is what we called 5 stages to digital transformation. Now, again, recognize that this business had been highly successful, but in executing projects in the field. But really what that amounted to from a process standpoint were these project books that had to be printed and bound and shipped out in order to perform the work. And so we knew that a very simple first stage of realizing simple value in IT was if we could digitize that content, make it shareable. At first we started looking at ERP applications or package applications that would kind of fit within our industry and seem to solve a lot of our problems. But we saw a lot of cost and complexity in those approaches, and ultimately a lack of flexibility. And so we opted for saying, hey, if we could at least get information in digital format, and if it was in a shareable format, that would be a huge win for our client, for our operations team. Now, once you have shareable content, there's that next level of efficiency in architecting a system. Is that just using a spreadsheet or a Word document or OneNote is not enforcing a lot of your business roles, and certainly it makes it difficult to capitalize on that information. And so ultimately, we knew we had to get past just a simple project site. And so the next stage of our automation, of our architecting the solution, involved us building workflows and automations. And this is where we'll talk about where we introduced some low-code, no-code type tools like Power Apps and Google App Sheets to really represent the software front end versus us trying to build a complete kind of development stack on .NET or Java. Getting past building a forms and workflow type process, the next kind of levels of efficiency or of purpose in this product is to capture information, capture and share information. And so we'll talk about the different decisions we made here in terms of the dashboards and analytics that we built and the rules that we defined within the system. And also more importantly is bringing that customer experience into the process, because that information ultimately needs to be communicated in terms of the state and status or the exceptions you're trying to handle. So instead of thinking that as a separate application, we embedded that information and we embedded the workflows in order to really actually achieve a lot more efficient operations. And we'll talk through some examples of that. The kind of the last stage of realizing the benefits of this transformation was getting into digital planning tools, 3D planning tools. And so we went through a few exercises there before we landed on, I think, a pretty healthy balance of where we didn't try to digitize everything, but using augmented reality and virtual reality. And I'll have a simple example to show you what that looks like. You're able to take a lot of information out in the field back to your own planning space. And so this avoided a lot of back and forth trips. And invariably when plans change, if you're going to have to go back out to that plan to ensure that the plans are executable, or worse off, you're not going to find out if your plan is good or bad until you show up on the day of execution, and you've got to make a lot of last minute changes. So we'll share with you how we've incorporated some of those tools into the overall planning process. So the first step is starting with basic content management, and we certainly looked at the range of professional content management tools and open source platform tools. But again, we recognized that we were going to gain a lot of benefits from keeping this simple. This happened to be mostly a Microsoft shop, and so using project sites and SharePoint seemed to be the easiest step forward versus us going and investing in a much more maybe robust platform for building content management. Now, the type of content that we're talking about, because this is a more technical operation, is these are a mixture of technical specifications, two-dimensional overviews, plot plans, Gantt charts for project planning, so lots of different types of information. And so quite simply, we were able to accomplish a phase one effort, which, even though this doesn't sound like that we did a lot, this actually unlocked a lot of efficiencies in the business. And also what was great about taking this kind of paper to digital step is we learned a lot of lessons that we would have kind of skipped or learned much later if we had to jump straight into building some type of structured or forms-based application. And so by creating this folder structure and having some of the metadata available to our teams, we were shocked at the efficiencies of a single OneNote document, or in the case of looking at that overview, being able to make an annotation and the rest of the team seeing that information in real time was a huge efficiency gain. Much more than what we had expected, which was great because that bought us a lot of confidence from the business that an IT project could deliver results. We did this within a 6-month time frame, and even though it may look simple on the surface, there were definitely a lot of business rules that we embedded behind the scenes to make sure the project site consistency and where information is placed and the steps and stages of check-in and check-out were adhered to. So then the next step we mentioned is once you have content and collaboration in place, the next piece is being able to structure that information and communicate the progress. And so here again, really trying to leverage off-the-shelf tools. These were the types of information that we're looking at attempting to structure. Now, surprisingly, for as ubiquitous as people use Microsoft Project Planning, it does not offer a very good experience if you're out in the field, if you're without looking at a complete project plan, which would overwhelm most staff members. And so we did spend efforts to customize the experience of capturing information in what we called our shutdown tracker. But quite simply, all that was a method for the field personnel to indicate that the task that they were assigned had been completed, or at what stage of completion it was at. So by simplifying that interface, and again, we're really using more off-the-shelf type tools like a Power App to automate that process. All of that information then can be routed back to the central planning tool so that it didn't take a multi-step process to update. And also what was important is that same information was feeding our dashboard and analytics tools. And then as I mentioned, we could have just stopped there and gained a lot of efficiencies of having that central console, or giving the foreman the view of what is going on. And not to mention, I forgot, there's one other hurdle that we had to achieve here in this type of field environment, is that it's a 24/7 execution. So it's not only one team that has to work in the day shift, all of that information and insights and to do has to be then efficiently handed off to the night shift, right? So this information was vital that it could be efficiently transferred and trusted, and not require the field personnel to go kind of validate information if they couldn't see, trust what was in the system. The other important part of a field operations job is communicating to the client. How are we doing? What are our challenges? What are our roadblocks? What are our next steps? And so what we found, a pretty easy and very accessible solution, since we had built it on a SharePoint and a web-based platform, was extending that interface to the customer. And so we originally had not planned for that in the initial phases, but when we recognized we would actually be saving steps in our business process because there was someone in the field assigned the responsibility of communicating twice a day, spending upwards of 30 minutes to an hour sharing what had happened, we now simply could just surface this information through a dashboard and let the client see that information in real time. We also extended this to very obvious measures such as sign-offs. There's a lot of steps in our process to ensure that there's a sign-off and an approval. And in the old days, that was pen and paper. In our new format, we very easily were able to enable a digital sign-off, and so that we could have the authority or the approvals to say, yes, this step was completed appropriately, and we can now move on to the next step. And that again saved a tremendous amount of time. And in fact, probably one of the most important stories that came out of this was that if we have a project that goes wrong, there's millions of dollars at stake. And there was a project that had executed prior to this technology being in place where we had to issue a multi-six-figure credit, simply because we could not validate that the verbal authorization for us to continue the work was actually there. And so having these tools in place creates accountability. It was obviously a much more of an efficiency play for us. And from the client standpoint, they gain confidence because now they can always see step with step for what we're doing. The systems are reflecting the state and status of that product. From an architectural standpoint, what was really important in that we knew we weren't going for an ERP or kind of a master data system for building this application, and we weren't necessarily going best of breed. We did want to ensure that in creating these different apps or low-code, no-code systems, that there was still a central repository, because there's a lot of information that would have to be shared amongst these systems. and we knew that we would get into trouble or in complexity from the integration standpoint. And so from the very early stages of this, we identified a single database that was going to be our master data for housing all of the information. And then as we kind of built onto the platform and added systems and interfaces, we always ensured that that data set was referencing the original data set. So I think a good practice up front isn't always, is knowing at least from the beginning that, yeah, the system will evolve and elaborate into maybe multiple point systems or expert best of breed systems. Knowing where the master data is and what owns it is really crucial, so that you minimize the amount of replication and worse off having information out of sync. And so we spent a good bit of time up front, and it certainly benefited us later, as we added another system on that required customer data, project data, status and equipment data. We didn't have to do a lot of work at that point. We could pretty much hook that information into the new system, and without creating kind of a redundant interface, we were able to pretty efficiently move the project along. So now moving to the next stages of what we call interactive documents, or digitizing the field operations, as we went from what I mentioned to you was paper to now kind of collaborative documents that you can annotate collaboratively. As we took a next step of saying, okay, what if those two-dimensional overviews actually were living documents? And from my experience, I have yet to see. I've seen project planning tools on one side, and I've seen kind of operational ERP systems on the other. But in most cases, in order to keep all these systems up to date, there's a 2-, 3-, and 4-step process of redundant inputs to keep these systems intact. And so the challenge that we undertook was this idea that if this two-dimensional drawing, which has pins and each pin has a status, if we were to update that information, that same information would automatically be reflected in our project planning tools. Not to mention that as the people in the field are executing the work, this two-dimensional overview with all the pins would change colors, would change sizes. If I'll hold focus over it, I could see all the issues or maybe blockers that are preventing that equipment from being isolated in this case. And so what this could have been a multi-six-figure investment, ultimately we accomplished this with actually without a lot of technical work. I'll get to some of the architecture slides on this, but using some low-code, no-code approaches, in less than 9 months, we went from a piece of paper concept to a field pilot with really good success. And I can tell you, just from previously having built some bespoke systems, had I looked at this solution or requirements, I would have said, I don't know how this would have been achieved in less than a year or without millions of dollars of investment. So it's a tribute to how far a lot of these low-code, no-code, or even these platform solutions have advanced, that let an idea to application really help you realize it much more quickly than in previous incarnations of web application tools. So let's talk about some of the key architectural decisions. So I mentioned, low code, no code. Now that's not to say that the system isn't without some complexity. There's definitely a need from an architectural standpoint. There ultimately needs to be a database, and it may not be a singular one, but in this case, we're representing it as an Azure database. Now from this, there are definitely multiple systems that we've developed, but they're not. They're more like micro applications. Again, there could be a Power App, it could be a Power BI report, it could be an Excel spreadsheet accessing that information, or as I mentioned, projects, a Microsoft project plan, being able to access that data. And so again, we put a lot of investment in ensuring that the way data got into an application was from the same source, or that if whatever system owns it, there's not a chance of getting systems out of sync. And using the more modern architectures that, in our case, we were using the Microsoft stack. What was really impressive is to watch, we were able to orchestrate a lot of that with, again, not a lot of code. It was mostly point and click orchestrations of how all the messages were routed and queued from the central database to the various systems. I haven't talked a lot about the front end of this, but you notice that the operators are highly experienced and very much they're used to working off what's called a PNID, or these two-dimensional overviews. They're very familiar and comfortable with that. So changing the interface materially from that would be a big lesson or big training effort and a hurdle. And so what was really impressive in incorporating, in this case, we used the Google AppSheet low-code, no-code platform, what that allowed us to do is to take these two-dimensional representations and then overlay pins. And then those pins could then interact with a form. And so again, without a lot of code and without really changing the interface, because what we were able to very quickly demonstrate is when we would pilot out this technology in front of our operations staff, and these are not technical people by any means. These are people that are 10 and 20 and 30-year refinery operations experts. They, generally speaking, don't interface with a lot of technology. They were very quickly adopting to the tools. And so it was a great lesson in knowing that when we could have the interface kind of fit the paper-based tools, the analogs that they were used to working with, it really improved the user adoption and the excitement that, hey, we could build this app. And again, from an IT standpoint, it really didn't take a lot of coding on the front end. This wasn't like we had to make it a pixel perfect process. We were able to use a lot of point and click tools in order to architect the front end of that system. So now that we've solved the front end or the interface or the structured information, there's another dimension to this that would really empower the complete solution, is that in doing our field operations work, we're interacting with a lot of equipment. And so we understood at the very beginning, 3 years back, that we could have introduced IoT type technology, sensors in the field, to share real-time information back into a dashboard. We purposely kind of slotted it as like a phase 3 so that we could, again, one, adopt the benefits and efficiencies and learn from the phase 1 and phase 2 technologies of putting collaboration tools in place and then layering in forms tools to create automation and workflow. And so with the IoT sensoring technology, what was really important about how we took this approach is we wanted to leverage as much off-the-shelf technology as possible. And when we studied IoT solutions, a lot of them come packaged with their own back end and front end. And you almost felt locked into that proprietary nature. And so what we chose to do was kind of separate the operations technology, which is really the sensoring tools that provide the messages or signals of temperature, pressure, flow. And then on the back end, we used very commercially available technology, which is basically, again, the Microsoft stack, to accept that information in. So other than transmitting that data up into the cloud, the rest of the solution was very much accomplished through very much off-the-shelf type technologies. And so in a very short period of time, we were able to prove getting these sensors in place, putting them in the field, having them communicate through a hub and into the cloud, which we thought might be the most complex part of this. We did it with off-the-shelf tools, and then on the back end, we were able to store all of this data into an Azure database. And then ultimately, that information flowing right back into the same interfaces that presents the two-dimensional overviews that I shared with you. So again, for me, for the many years I've been in technology and knowing how complicated many of the requirements or solutions can be, and certainly that the business's expectation of what technology provided, I was very pleasantly surprised that we could deliver a solution that met the requirements of the business, their expectations, and from a technology or a timeline standpoint, we were able to lay all of this out within, again, this was about another six-month effort from procuring the equipment to getting the sensors lined up and then having the backend database and all the reporting on top of it. And I'd say 90% of this was really using off-the-shelf tools that any of us have access to, and I think that was a huge benefit, because had we gone with an Emerson or some of these companies that sell not only the equipment with the kind of the back end or all that the communication layers, we would have been locked into some very proprietary tools that would have been very difficult not only to adopt, but then to get information in and out of those systems would have been a challenge as well. So getting kind of the final stages of what the digital transformation represented was looking at 3D planning tools. Originally, we piloted this idea that the entire plant could be digitized and captured in a three-dimensional representation. What we came to find out was that process was expensive and time-consuming, and in many cases there was just a lot of unnecessary details. We only spent maybe 3 to 6 months investigating that exercise, but thankfully we were able to very quickly establish that approach was not going to yield the kind of results that we expected. And so the pivot for us was then saying, you know what, Apple has recently come up with some pretty phenomenal technologies with this LiDAR scanning capability. And so now with a tablet that any of us can purchase, you're able to scan a space relatively quickly with a phenomenal degree of accuracy. Now, our job in our business is not to be engineering specific and down to the millimeter precise, but these laser scanning tools actually give you some pretty high precision. And so what we were able to recognize is with a commercial grade Apple tablet or even a Samsung based type tablet, we could go out and have somebody take a scan and have a full representation of the space that we need to be operating within and bring that information either back to their workspace or back to the team. And so now you can imagine that in that 12-month window of planning, things are changing. We can change along with it because we have the fully described space that we can see what's going on. Or in the case of augmented reality, we've shrunk the space down to fit on top of a desktop, but now you can kind of traverse the space all at full scale. And so you can see in this case, this is our equipment laid out in our client space. Now, normally you would not even know what this would look like until the day you show up for an execution. And if you show up and you don't have all the right piping, if it's not going to be laid out because that alleyway that you had planned for is now being blocked by scaffolding, you could be introducing, a half a shift to a day's worth of delays. And so it was, it's becoming vital for us now that we can visualize this information, share it with our customer. And what we're gaining out of this is confidence, accuracy, that what we're going to plan out in the field is actually going to work when it comes time to produce that result. So in summation, our digital transformation, even though we had a complete vision of leveraging lots of different technologies, and we evaluated ERP tools, best of breed approach, where we ended up landing, and it was almost, we walked ourselves through this process, was by saying that we had to deliver value incrementally and consistently to the business. We had tremendous business participation. It's a part I didn't mention probably enough, but this would not have been successful if the business would have given us this vision here and then would have walked away and said, hey, come back in 4 years. Their operations team stayed committed week over week, and they weren't just subject matter experts, they were business analysts embedded on the project to commit to the results and the solutions. And also by layering in these technologies, we ensured that there wasn't more than a 6-month gap that we didn't deliver some type of meaningful efficiency gain in the business. And so what that did was build a lot of confidence both on the business and the IT side, because I can tell you if I would have told my president it's going to take 2 years and $2 million, he probably would have said, go pound sand. Like, I just don't trust that we can pull this off. It seems too complicated. And so by naturally using a lot of off-shelf capabilities, benefiting from collaborative tools, we were able to step our way through a lot of the benefits of technology before we even got into the heavy lifting stuff around using IoT or this augmented reality and virtual planning tools. And so to kind of wrap up again in terms of what were these lessons learned, the software as a service, platform as a service tools were really crucial in that we were building custom applications, but doing it without a heavy lift on the infrastructure side. Because I know in my past, we would have spent a lot more money and time on the servers and on the scaling and on ensuring that it's high availability. By leveraging a lot of these Azure, Microsoft, or Google stacks, we're trusting in their high availability architectures, and we could focus a lot more on the business value. The low code, no code was really an eye opener for me because I come from where user experience is highly critical and performance is also crucial. We were able to overcome that with really high quality interfaces. And in cases where there were any kind of inefficiencies in how the front end communicated to the back end, getting support from your vendor, because there is code behind the low code, no code platforms. And so ultimately, if you've got to build efficiency into that process or ensure that the application is communicating and not just wearing out battery life, we were able to work with the vendor to get past some of the limitations that we couldn't access through the normal front end. And then the last piece is integrating the customer experience. I think there was huge efficiencies that we benefited from by having automated digital signatures and sharing information, eliminated a lot of our own process steps. And so by kind of incorporating that as part of the vision was really a key, I think, to our success and ultimately the benefits that we realized through this digital journey. And so, Jose, that's That is our lessons
Outstanding,
learned.
Kipp. Outstanding. I'm gonna ask you to hit the stop sharing screen button so that I can come in with the camera. Um, what a great reveal of how it's actually done, because we talk about enterprise architecture, we talk about digital transformation, and some of the discussions can become a bit abstract. And then here you come and you're showing kind of like the entire evolution of a system to get you to AR, VR, machine learning analytics, right? Which are things that we talk about, but when you see the application and the evolution of the application, like what you have just shared with us, it brings a whole different perspective on the challenges there that happen here. So I have a number of questions and themes that came up from the audience. I encourage the audience to keep asking questions that add value to your context related to the journey that Kipp and Refined Technologies went through here. First of all, for a bit of context, Kipp, for some in our audience, you're operating in high-risk industries where there's these turnarounds are taking place. There's a lot of pressure of doing them accurately, precisely, and fast, and with incredible levels of safety to make sure that everything is done well, and and safety is paramount importance. Now, with this high risk environment that you're operating in, you could have come back in 2019 and say, hey, we could spend multi-million dollars in a AR, VR type of commercial application. But it seems to me that you look at the reality of what was happening on the field, and there's a bunch of guys out there with paper stuff that they're just taking notes. And then you say, well, hold on, you know what? Maybe you're not ready for that just yet. Tell me a little bit about the evolution. You showed early on like 5 different stages and segments in your evolution. Did you start this process thinking that you're going to get to AR, VR, and ML analytics, or this kind of evolved over time? How was that approach?
Yeah, it was, so it was a little of both. I think we've all experienced technology in our personal lives, and so we've seen whether it's banking, online shopping. Our kids are pretty sophisticated with their smartphone devices, and so I think just from a consumer standpoint, the expectation of technology is really ratcheted up. And then here we stare in our business world, business lives, and we're like, hey, what are we doing? We're definitely way behind. So there was some vision setting early on that we thought, hey, we could get to using these more advanced tools. But then you're right, the context was going out into the field and recognizing, okay, we're in pen and paper, and so to think that we could go from pen and paper to a package application could be a big risk. And so, for a business like us, we're not Apple, Google, Facebook. We don't have infinite resources. It is crucial that we have to be able to leverage commercial technologies. And so this isn't a simple just buy build, because there was nothing to buy out of the box that was going to make it all work. And so, but we did know that if we weren't at least leveraging the on the backs of Apple's tablets, and their AR planning tools, or in the Microsoft case, the SharePoint tools, or in the Google case, the app sheets, those saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars and months, if not years, of development time. So we knew if we were hitting a roadblock, our answer couldn't be that we can just go build it. Like, we couldn't just brute force, put money and time into it and say, yeah, we're going to go proprietary. We really forced ourselves to leverage off-the-shelf technologies, even though we had to put it all together. There was still an architectural process to this, making sure the data was consistent, making sure the performance was there, the interface was consistent. Those were still all the disciplines you have to apply, but really focusing on off-the-shelf technologies was a key lever in this project.
It's very good, very good. It's impressive the evolution of the technology and how the architecture seems to have evolved with it. Switching gears a little bit, a lot of questions and commentary around collaboration. I mean, this is a difficult application because you can look at enterprise architecture as kind of the sterile thing that happens with IT tools, but you exemplify the next level of enterprise architecture, the real level, which is collaborating with the business. And now in your case here in this application, there are multiple layers of collaboration. You have the enterprise architects, if you will, and those who are developing these digital solutions. But then you have your own organization and getting people in the business, in your own business, aligned. but then you have to align also with a customer on the field, and in this case, multiple customers on the field, the people who work around these turnarounds and this activities. Tell us a little bit about collaboration. How do you get the stakeholders aligned on something like this?
The thing that, and I've been a part of RTI now for a little over 2.5, 3 years. And as I mentioned, RTI has been in business for 20 plus years. And so one of the fortunate things I walked into culturally is that when there's a problem or a project to solve, everyone's invested. In my previous life, I would, if it was if the business came up with an idea, they would hand that project to IT and say, hey, go deliver it. And then we would have the difficulty of interpreting those requirements, getting limited amounts of time to turn that subject matter expertise into business requirements. Those turn into specification, that turns into code, and we would probably have a 5-man team in order to kind of translate all that into an application to hand it back. And so what was different with RTI is that the business leaders and the operations people that know the product, they know the process the best, they were invested in the day-to-day meetings. And so that way, when we came up with a solution or a result or a milestone, very, very quickly, they were a part of it. We weren't far off. And once we were able to put it in their hands and actually go use it in the field, we were piloting these technologies as we went along. They were giving us rapid feedback. And so it was crucial that the operations stayed involved and they really drove it like business analysts would drive a project, because they understood the product better than anyone. And when they went out there, they probably came up with 10 ideas back to us that we didn't even think about. It wasn't even part of the original design, because again, they saw the power of putting these tools in their hands. So it was a really virtuous process of getting operations, committed to the project, ultimately to kind of get this result, because we didn't think of everything that we shared with you. That was not all from the beginning. A lot of that was just the innovation along the way.
That's fantastic. Seems like you had the directional guidance, but you really iterated. It's a bit of an agile approach to project planning and execution. Is that right?
Yeah, I was trying to avoid the word agile just because it can be a cliche or overused, but the reality was we did constrain ourselves. Like if we couldn't deliver value in a 3 or 6 month window, we questioned it. We said there's got to be a different way or a different path forward. And so that the leadership didn't use the word agile. They were just like impatient or impetuous, like deliver us a solution. So from an IT standpoint, that forced us to not get overly complicated and not to get too invested in the architecture. Like we had to ensure that we can leverage off the shelf capabilities. But agile was key. I mean, the way we communicated, the way we set up project plans, and the way you saw that 4-year timeline, there was not longer than a 6-month window where something was being shared out to the field to say, hey, is this working or not? And so I think that really built a lot of trust, right? We wouldn't have been in year 4 if year 1 and 2 hadn't delivered something to the business materially.
That's fantastic. And in that process, Kipp, you talk a lot about the decision to buy or build. And tell us a little bit more about that. What are some of the key factors that you're weighing on between buying or building, an application?
Yeah, which, it's interesting. I think in the historic world, 10, 15 years back, buy, build maybe had a different meaning, because in this case, I would argue what we did was a build, but we were building with kind of bought components. Like we weren't just coding from scratch. Using a lot of whether it's the Amazon or the Microsoft or Google stack, they have a lot of building block tools. And so what impresses me in building modern systems today is you don't have to spend so much time and money just to get the infrastructure in place. We were very quickly focusing more on the business kind of requirements of what we needed to build. Now, there's still a very technical exercise, because integrating 2 systems, whether you build them or buy them, is not simple, and let alone if there's 5 or 10 of those systems. The user experience, the consistency, there were still a lot of factors we had to weigh in on, but ultimately I found more of our time shifted to the functions, the business value pieces, and by using the configurable, clickable components, we were in some ways building, we were buying. We were buying capability versus there was not a lot of code we had to write to make the system all kind of architect or to orchestrate and to work together. And so I think that's really the benefits when I say SaaS or PaaS or iOS. Like these are now building block tools, point and click tools that allow you to do some pretty powerful application builds that I think businesses would really benefit from versus going off the shelf or packaged app.
So, and on that subject, is there a concern that you may end up the build with low code and no code, but you may end up with an overly customized solution that may not be modular or configurable or interoperable, how do you prevent yourself from building this integrated thing that only works for you and nobody else, and then you cannot, it's hard to evolve. How do you balance all of that?
Yeah, there was a technical exercise, and maybe the one ways we try to approach it is we looked at the data layer. I mean, to me, I like to look at the information like underlying the application, because ultimately we're pushing and pulling and transferring information in this whole process. And so that's where the IT team was able to look at it holistically and understand the information, because the information we understood before when it was pen and paper. We knew the projects, the equipment, the customers, the process, like all of that information was understood. And so we sat out and kind of graphically understood that information before we built any or bought any system, because that way we would make sure we're not introducing and making something overly complicated that we couldn't manage, because we were definitely worried in taking this approach by not going packaged application or ERP, we might create a Frankenstein of a system. But really analyzing the data is crucial, right? And most businesses should understand their current data structure, whether you have it, whether it's automated or not.
Excellent. Very, very good. Now, you talked also about low code, no code benefits throughout. Go a little bit deeper on that. At what point do you evaluate, or you decide that low code, no code is a good option here? How do you go through that process?
Yeah, it was interesting because I think for many of us in IT, you take pride in the what you can create, and so I think the thought is that low code, no code apps can kind of limit your creativity or limit your ability to architect a perfect solution. Certainly my first lesson in that was Salesforce. Salesforce at least 12 years ago used to say no software. I'd argue today it's very much like software, right? It's got more complexity to it. But again, what really impressed me is by putting this low code, no code tool also puts a tool in a business analyst's hands. I'm not saying that a business analyst needs to have the appreciations of information architecture and good design practices. But what we found is there's a lot more people participating in the development process versus what used to happen is all of those requirements had to get wrapped up for one person or your group of developers. That really has unlocked the developer now to include a lot larger audience. And again, people that understand the business domain and the IT domain together is a much more efficient team instead of taking 5 or 6 people to understand the problem and describe it. So I was really impressed with using those tools, and where we're pushing limits of this technology. This isn't just a real simple signature app. We're out in the field doing high risk process. I would argue that when you need to depend on efficiencies, we had access to the Google leadership and to the Microsoft leadership, where when we told them something wasn't working and we didn't have access to that capability, they could unlock some of those efficiencies for us. So I'd say that's kind of the one caveat. There was always some code behind the no-code systems, and knowing who those decision makers are can really help ensure that you're not going to get kind of caught in a trap where you can't unsolve a problem.
Very good. Kipp, listen, there are a lot of people here who are, software developers, enterprise architects, and they are listening to you and they're saying, well, this is a really cool team because, you have a leader with a vision, you have a team that's very collaborative based on what you said. It seems like the company has a very clear purpose, and it really lives that purpose with its values, and collaboration is a key part of that. So when you're looking for someone to become part of your team as a digital leader, what are you looking for in enterprise architects beyond their technical capabilities?
Yeah, I'd say that the hardest part, if you're coming at the problem if you're coming at the domain from a technical standpoint, you got to understand the business domain. And so probably the biggest challenge is, do you really understand the business problem? And so if you don't, you got to get your both feet into it. Like, you got to spend a day in those roles. You got to go out in the field and execute with them hand in hand. And so we've kind of blended our team in so that some of the people in our IT team come from the field operations. And so that's been a huge advantage for us in understanding and describing business problems. So when you're truly an enterprise architect, the business domain knowledge is crucial, and you got to get it through either adding to your team and or getting out in the field yourself in order to appreciate the problems you're solving. I just don't know any two ways about it, right? We really definitely leverage a lot of the operations expertise and pulling them inside of IT in order to create, I think, a good solution, or to create that right architecture.
Kipp, what a masterclass on the blend of enterprise architecture, customer excellence and experience, and collaboration. An incredible 5-stage development of a tool that's creating value for the enterprise, for the customers, for professionals. What a great reveal. Thank you so much for showing us the real when enterprise architecture meets the road. And we really appreciate you taking your time of your busy schedule to share your wisdom and expertise with our global audience today.
Jose, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Kipp Vann, the Chief Digital Officer at Refine Technologies, where their purpose is that eternal purpose fuels excellence. Think about that for a moment, and I think that what you see here exemplified by Kipp Vann and his team is that how that eternal purpose fueling excellence is being applied and implemented for digital transformations and shaping the way that they do enterprise architecture. Very close collaboration with their clients, with the internal teams in developing the solutions progressively at a fraction of the cost and schedule that compared to commercially available applications. So this is a real good hands-on application of enterprise architecture in the energy industry in this case. Now we're going to be taking a break. When we come back, we're going to wrap up day one with a real treat, and we're going to be bringing you a leader of innovation in the 21st century. And we're talking about Bettina von Stam, who is the founder of the Innovation Leadership Forum. I believe she's going to be coming to us directly from Munich in Germany to talk to us about the core competency for thriving in the 21st century. And we're going to find out what that core competence is at the very top of the hour. I'll see you soon.